Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we continue our King Kong retrospective with the 1962 film King Kong vs. Godzilla, which is actually a Godzilla movie. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the Alex Van Helsing series from HarperCollins. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth Studios, lead singers of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. And he has some new Rise from Fire songs up just this week. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy, and welcome back.
Thanks.
Also in Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, editor-in-chief of HorrorMovies.net, writer for Rockabilly Online, and creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
Hello. And finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. All right, okay. King Kong vs. Godzilla is a 1962 Japanese science fiction kaiju film featuring King Kong and Godzilla. It was produced and distributed by Toho. It's the third movie in the Godzilla franchise in the Showa series, which Tony can probably explain to us what is the Showa series. It is the first of two Japanese King Kong movies, and we are going to do both of them. We'll be wrapping up our King Kong retrospective next week with the unforgettable King Kong Escapes. Produced as part of Toho's 30th anniversary celebration, this film remains the most attended of all Godzilla films to date, and the one that I saw was a peculiarly Americanized version. It is kind of the Japanese movie, but it's got a bunch of American reporters sort of stuck into it and explaining kind of what's going on in the movie in the grand tradition of the original Godzilla. So, Tony, you're the man who we most sort of turn to when it comes to all things Godzilla or giant monkeys or Japanese films, and this movie has all of those. So if you could give us your opening thoughts about King Kong versus Godzilla, what are we looking for? Is this movie still worth seeing for 50 years later, and anything else you can think of? Lay it on us.
I think it's pretty fun. I like this era. So like the Showa period was 1926 to, I guess they count 1989. So all the original kind of stuff we think of as older Godzilla was during that period. I find this movie fun, but man, oh man. So I have it on Blu-ray, but the Blu-ray only has the American version.
Mhm.
And again, like the original Gojira, like Godzilla 85, which was the American version, and this one, American producers really thought American audiences were super stupid. Dumb as wrong. Because they will explain, by the way, here's the thing that's happening. The Japanese version I actually caught because I was wanting to watch some bits earlier today. So I had my phone. I looked it up on YouTube. There was a version of the original 62 version with Spanish subtitles. So it's just the movie with Spanish subtitles. None of this, hey, by the way, I'm a reporter telling you cool things. Did you know that there's this berry? Oh, look, let's get this other Japanese guy who's sort of kind of supposed to bridge things for us. None of that. Submarine? Oh, by the way, there's a submarine. Like, none of that. No, we don't need that because we can tell that there's a submarine because we're not idiots. Like, they still have this idea, I guess, that, Godzilla's for 8-year-olds. Let's explain it that way. That part was maddening watching it. And I've seen this a couple times, so I got the Blu-ray. I do wish that there was a Japanese version of this available, in this region. I'm sure you can get it in Japan, but as far as just buying it legit, you want to get it from Amazon in this region, that doesn't exist, and that's a shame. I really enjoy the film. I think it's tons of fun, and especially like harkening back to being a kid.
Yeah,
coolest thing. Even though this incarnation of Godzilla is he's a little bit more suit like than some of the other ones, but the idea of King Kong and Godzilla duking it out was just blew my mind as a kid. Wait, was monsters because at the time there had also been a King Kong cartoon. When I was younger, like when I was watching this on Monster Theater, there was the original Kong. I mean the 70s Kong, and then there was also a Godzilla cartoon. So all of this put together, once you realize that years before, coming onto your screen on Monster Theater is the two biggest monsters ever fighting each other, man. Front row seats for that. So there is a little bit of nostalgia at play for me, but I still think it's a really fun movie.
Outstanding. Julia, I don't know if you've ever seen King Kong versus Godzilla before. Do you want to respond? How did this movie work for you? If at all, and I'm also curious, Tony, picking up a thread, Tony said there were some people who thought these movies were for 8-year-olds. Is that what's going on? What is this movie?
Well, I don't know what the movie is, but I can tell you what I feel like it is.
All right.
I agree with Tony was saying about that. That actually helped me make peace with it a little bit as far as the Basil exposition crap that they were doing with the the journalists and whatever. I was like, what is this? And that helps me understand it a little bit more. This idea that if it is supposed to be for 8-year-olds, but even so, I think 8-year-olds could have figured it out too by seeing that yes, in fact, there's a submarine and there's Godzilla and there's King Kong and now they're together. So I did feel like that was all a waste of time to have these people just pop up and say a bunch of stupid stuff. But so starting out, I had not seen the film, and so starting out, I really thought it was really dumb. I was like, oh my god, that's the worst costume. I was just super irritated. But let me tell you, when they start fighting each other, it was so fun. I was having such a good time watching King Kong and Godzilla fight. It was just hilarious and delightful. I mean, there's like so many things even are played for laughs, like King Kong jumping up and down in glee, and then him getting thrown back and like Godzilla just smacking his hands together like, yeah, score.
Yeah.
And I mean, so that stuff that gave me great joy. But so I'd say about half of the movie I just thought was too dumb to live, and then the other half was hysterical. So I am glad that I saw it for that reason. And I'm trying to think. I was reading some of the IMDb stuff, and apparently initially this film was spawned by Willis O'Brien, who wanted to do a film called King Kong versus Frankenstein, which cracks me up.
Right.
And so when he couldn't find a studio to do that, instead he did this. But I thought that was a really interesting idea. It would be like a Frankenstein made of animals instead of people. But I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking some more about it.
I mean, for what it's worth, we'll talk about it later. But Toho did wind up doing a giant Frankenstein movie, and it's everything that is cracked up to be. Drew, what are your thoughts on King Kong versus Godzilla?
Well, first of all, two things. This isn't actually the first Japanese King Kong movie. There are two lost Japanese King Kongs, which there's some. You can Google and find photographs of them, so you can see what a Japanese King Kong from the 30s would look like. But the movies, alas, are completely lost. Secondly, it was not Willis O'Brien who put this to Toho. Willis O'Brien had a treatment called King Kong versus Prometheus, which is essentially the same concept. It was King Kong versus Frankenstein. It was about a monster made from animal parts that was created by Frankenstein's grandson, and they were going to duke it out in San Francisco. John Beck, the guy that actually ended up producing this and got this in with Toho and Universal, he's the one that turned this movie into King Kong versus Godzilla. And Willis O'Brien actually was very brokenhearted when he saw the final results of this movie with its somewhat, as Tony already said, somewhat dodgy special effects. So this movie actually has a really fascinating
it said that the way it was written was that the idea was spawned by Willis O'Brien, and then it does say that producer John Beck is the one who offered it to Toho.
Oh,
so
he some underhanded stuff.
IMDb.
Yeah. No. I'm not pointing the finger I'm not pointing the finger at you. You were going off of what was written. But this movie does, like the 70s Kong, this movie does have a very interesting production history. Which I'm sure we'll talk about throughout the podcast. I like this movie a lot. I had a beat up VHS copy of this that I watched probably hundreds of times when I was a kid. I have likely the same Blu-ray Tony does. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's actually mostly just a King Kong movie with some Godzilla tacked on in there. It's funny how much King Kong stuff that we've seen in the other movies that we've done is actually also in this.
Yes.
But I also am going to have to echo, like, when I was a kid, I thought all the stuff with the UN reporters made the movie seem more epic and apocalyptic. As an adult, that stuff is infuriating and annoying. And I like all the stuff that is from the Japanese movie a lot. And acknowledging, like, this is definitely not the best Godzilla suit we've seen in any of the Godzilla movies. It's a really, really bad Kong suit. But I don't care. I think this movie's charming. I love seeing all the miniatures. I love all the crazy monster stuff, and I love the fact that we get this amped up Super Kong with electrical powers, because being a giant gorilla just isn't enough.
Yeah.
I mean, being a giant gorilla isn't even giant enough. When one of the things that strikes me about this movie is that this King Kong is like, he's got to be 4 or 5 times taller than the King Kong of the original film. He's enormous. The original King Kong had to climb the Empire State Building. This guy would literally be taller than the Empire State Building. It's amazing, or at least the same height. It's because they've hyped up King Kong to be Godzilla's height, and Godzilla's very tall. But so my take on it. I thought it's a little slow. I mean, it has pacing issues, but I think the miniatures are so amazing to see. I can never get over just how difficult it must be to build these miniatures that break in just such a way that look really good when you step on them, and they come apart in layers, and it looks like something that is real in a way, except for you're looking at a model, and that makes you kind of even more impressed by it. I think in a way that's part of the art, because if the art were a perfect representation of a building, it wouldn't be amazing to you, because it would just look like they were blowing up a building. So there's something about these beautifully made miniatures being destroyed that's kind of just incredibly fun to watch. The final fight scene is really cool. The other thing I think is interesting here are the politics especially of the UN. Again, we're looking at an American movie, and so these UN or the American-made inserts, all the UN reporter stuff is so strange but so fitting with 1962. These guys in suits are going to sit down and calmly explain bizarre things to us. Some of it doesn't make sense in continuity, and as we get into it, I want us to sort of hash out how exactly like, for instance, when Godzilla appears, and I assume this is not the original Godzilla, because the original Godzilla died in the oxygen destroyer, and the second Godzilla, whatever happened to him in Godzilla Raids Again. This might be that one, but regardless, this Godzilla is trapped in an iceberg, and when he comes out, people are like, "Oh my gosh, it's Godzilla," and then the reporters are like, "It is astonishing that a great dinosaur could be running around all the cities." And what I was thinking is, it's only 9 years ago that a Godzilla like nearly destroyed all of Tokyo, so it can't be that astonishing. We've kind of seen these before, and a lot of times the movie seems like it can't quite decide whether the people living in it know that they live in a world with giant monsters or not. So actually, Tony, do you have any wisdom on that? I mean, do you notice this, or
dialogue? Like, I mean, they've cut things and reshuffled things and added people, so who knows? I think at some point I've seen the Japanese one subtitled, but it's been a long time. And like I said, I found a subtitled version on YouTube to look for that has what I can only assume is the original, cut. But I mean, they're cutting things and moving things around and saying things that, again, they think Americans are stupid, or either that, or you're tiny. either you're stupid or you're just a tiny child, and why, as an adult, you would possibly want to see this movie is beyond the people who made this. I mean, they even the soundtrack is made up of other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's they're library pieces from other American
It's far
adventure
be it
films.
to have the guy who, why would you want the original Japanese soundtrack? I mean, are you really American? Come on.
It's really crazy because that is a very it's a very Hollywood-like score that Ifukube wrote for the
I mean,
original.
he's
So
good. You can buy CDs of his work. It's good stuff. But America is what America is, I guess. I mean, look, this in the grand scheme of things is probably not high art, but I'm still for film preservation as far as I mean,
yeah,
and it's so ham-fisted. These scenes with these smug, smirking guy telling you, by the way, submarines. Oh, look, they're selling a thing. Like they have a scene where they're like, "Hey, we're getting these berries from this island." But before
yes,
that, you have him holding like, "By the way, these guys are getting these berries from this island."
yes, you're
Let's
right.
cut
We
to
see
them
the scene
talking about-
twice.
Let's cut to them talking about exactly what I just told you. Why?
That's
It's America. Like
yeah.
I had forgotten how much of that there was until I got the Blu-ray and started watching it again. And it's maddening in the same way that, a lot of stuff in the American Godzilla is that way, original 50s Godzilla where it's not as ham-fisted, but it's still a lot of exposition that didn't need to be there. There's nothing wrong with the original.
Well, specifically, yeah, I think you just nailed it exactly right. The reporter, the so-called UN reporter, who is this American reporter, I think assuming this is the real world, what that would really mean is that he is a reporter for an American newspaper stationed at the UN. But whatever, doesn't matter. The so-called UN reporter tells us, yes, this Japanese company has sent an expedition to go get a bunch of big berries that have a wonderful narcotic effect and maybe some kind of chemotherapy effect. Who knows? Unclear. And then you're right. We immediately cut to a scene that tells us exactly the same thing, only they actually have people doing it in dialogue, so it's slightly more interesting. That is really funny.
Because it's in the movie.
Yeah, it's like get to the movie.
They already
okay.
wrote it, and they wrote it in a way that fits. But
I can't help but think that it's probably like, here's a white guy to come on that you can listen to and you'll be able to understand.
Of course.
I think there's
America of the time, and
Yeah.
I mean, we still have people still have a problem watching subtitled movies. So that's why we need a remake a year after a movie comes out, because far be it for us to absorb another culture. That would be terrible.
So getting into it, I wanted to mention this is a movie that takes place in a world where the UN is literally the army of the world. 1962, in the world of Japanese films, or at least Toho films as they come to the United States, there is a worship for a world, or rather, there's a hunger for a world government like nothing you've ever seen. I mean, a way that would make a lot of Americans really uncomfortable. They just hunger for an international world government that just calls the shots and has all the armies and can gather things together. I mean, I've only become recently aware of just how much that world exists in the Toho universe, but doesn't exist in the real world. And we got the UN, of course, but in the movies, the UN is it's long past. All the other governments are definitely kind of subservient to this world organization.
Well, I mean, if you have giant monsters, I think you probably would need people to be like, okay, military action over here.
Yes. Yeah, I guess you're right. You're totally, the UN might get a lot, or some multinational organization might get a lot more powerful if in fact we had giant monsters running around. So okay, we pick up the first thing that's going on in this movie is that there are two things simultaneously. There's a submarine that's out exploring under the ice cap, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to Godzilla. But first, what's going on is the plot of King Kong is being crammed down into a small amount of space and given to us, which, by the way, we would have been perfectly happy with in the 2005 version, as we talked about last week. Meaning no disrespect, but they really get to it fast here. They've got they've got a boat. There's a pharmaceutical company in this case that wants to send these guys, a couple of lovable middle class salarymen off to this island to go investigate these berries that they're calling soma after Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Soma is this amazing indigenous medicine that comes in these berries, and I guess it has both some kind of narcotic and maybe healing effect. And also, possibly, there's a monster on the island, and they should go bring back the monster.
Well, they actually even say that the natives believe that the reason why the god is so big is because he drinks this berry juice.
Yes, right. That this berry juice, which and again, they said in the intro that this berry juice was being investigated in the realm of chemotherapy. Now that was in the American translation, so who knows? So it might be a healing kind of juice. It might have a narcotic effect, and the natives believe that it makes animals giant. And actually, I think you're right, Drew, because I think that turns out to be true. Because when one of the first things that happens, and I apologize for skipping around in the island section, but one of the first things that happens is that King Kong fights a giant octopus. Does Drew, do you want to explain, or Tony, either one of you can explain the giant octopus scene?
Well, I mean, it invades the village searching for the berries. But I mean, I thought it was cool. I'd forgotten about that. That's a nice homage to the new Kong, the Skull Island Kong, like fighting the octopus. That was pretty cool.
It's a giant octopus too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's literally
that was real. I mean,
yeah,
you see it and you're okay. It's an octopus crawling around some pretty awesome miniatures, but it's pretty effective. I mean, there's people running around, and it would be scary as hell if that invaded where you were. They keep it nice and wet, so it's really grotesque and scoochy, and attacking everything.
Well, it's a real octopus. That's so clever to actually just show, to force perspective and compositing, and also having an octopus climb all over a model.
Creepy and weird. It's creepy and weird. They blew hot air on the octopuses to get them to move around. They had like 4 of them that they used. But it's weird because the effect is really good because it's a real octopus, like you said. And so it's they've got the sound and it's all strange. But then whenever like he's fighting, King Kong's fighting it, then they're using like this weird plastic fake looking model. So that's what I'm saying when I say that like. There's some parts of it would be great, and then there would be something like that where I'd just be like, "Oh, come on, you ruined it."
I mean, there's a certain charm to it, but I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't know about this era. That there are better suits, I think, in other Kong movies. I mean, Godzilla movies, and even Kong movies, like the King Kong where he fights Mecha Kong. That's kind of cooler looking.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how different the suit is next week. I'm not even going to go look at it until I watch it.
If you just compare the suit in this, I mean, not that they have the technology or even the budget, but if you just compare the suit to this to the Rick Baker Kong suit in Kong 76, I mean, this is way downhill. But I mean, it gets the job done. I mean, it's goofy, but once you, as Adam was saying a lot, last week, once you're committed to the Goonie universe of this film, I. As a fan of Kong, it would have been nice to have had a more convincing Kong suit, but whatever. It's not without its charm.
Oh, also, by the way, not only did they send these guys, but they also sent, in quotes, comic relief guy. Man, did that?
Okay, yeah. So on this ship, on this ship, you've got the middle class guys who are the main characters, and obviously that's because you want the people who are predominantly in the audience to see themselves in the main characters. I guess that's that's why we have these middle class main characters. They're salarymen, they eat steak, so they're actually doing pretty well for themselves. But they work for but they're journalists. And yes, they have a Gilligan type dude on the ship with them. And Are we to understand? I'm going to call him Gilligan because he wears a Gilligan hat and he's really skinny like Gilligan. Are we to understand that Gilligan is a native who has like been hired by this company, and so he's kind of gotten citified, but he's still basically a native, or is he just a country bumpkin who kind of speaks the native languages? What's the deal with him?
I
Well,
forgot.
he's certainly
In the
in.
American version, I don't know if do they go into what his whole deal is?
No, but he speaks the native
No,
language. We know that.
Yeah.
His name is actually Taco, if you want to call him the
Oh
right name.
yeah.
He's
I
it's
will
he
call him Taco. Yes.
it means octopus.
Oh, no
he's
kidding.
got the makeup on like the natives on Faroe Island, not Skull Island, which I guess we
Yeah.
should have pointed out. I think he's supposed to be a native that left the island because of the way he interacts and the way that they have him.
Yeah.
We'll be kind and say costumes.
Okay. All right.
Oh man.
Yes. Let's talk about this is, I think, the single most interesting thing to me about this whole. Well, no, that's an exaggeration. But one of the probably top three most interesting things about this movie is the way the natives are portrayed, because now seeing the Japanese portray an indigenous people in a way that is every bit as absurd as the way the Americans portray indigenous people, it led me to think, what the hell is going on with the way we portray indigenous people in the movies? Julia, did you have any thoughts about this? I mean, like, how are we to think about this? Is this like, is it
Well,
like Mickey? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, we are always going to look at anybody who's different from us as some kind of caricature. And so, like Katerina was asking me after we watched, like, well, what would be the caricature for Americans or the stereotype? And I said, it's what we are in our worst selves when we travel, which is loud and obnoxious and selfish and just assuming everybody needs to speak English and to put up with our crap and serve us and whatever. It's all that, and it is that is there is an aspect of Americans that is that, but we're not all only that. So that's what we see is as strangers to the culture. What we see is the color and the music and the dancing and the strange piercings and whatever. We see that in some villages, and that's fascinating to us as strangers to that culture. So we grab it, and it's the same for the Japanese. We grab at that and we go, that's what we're gonna. Even though they have schools and they cook and they do all the things that we do, just like but when we see how they dance and how they sing and how they do those things, that's what captivates us and makes us go, oh, that's so different from us, and so we're gonna exploit that in this in this entertainment. But I think it is. It's racist, but it's also just is. It's like I say, it's just making caricatures of things, just like we do with anybody else. I think.
So
Well,
two things.
this is also in keeping with colonialism that we've seen in all of these King Kong movies, and this is in some ways even more on the nose because they're like, okay, we're going to come to this island and we're going to buy these natives off with cigarette and a radio, and I mean, that's maybe we can that's the Japanese making fun of Westerners, but I don't think it is. I think that's them playing off of something that have seen repeated in almost all of these movies, except for the new Kong, which we finally kind of evolved out of the sort of colonial mindset, or at least we'd like to think we have.
So, Julia, if you want to know what Japan thinks about Americans or Europeans, big noses and hairy, and you can see this in a bunch of caricatures. Like it's easy to find that. So, like, if a character in like an anime has a huge nose, they're European or American.
Sure.
Also, part of this, see, Mothra has, like, the movie Mothra originally has natives, but they're not painted brown. And, like, there's a lot of this where it's like, oh man, it's really uncomfortable. But also of the time, there's still, and I saw some stuff in Japan, since Japan is very much homogenous. There's a lot of like racism that happens where you say, "Hey, this is kind of racist," and they'll go, "Well, what? I mean, that's how it is, right?" There's not a so like Cyborg 009 has a black character where you look at the manga now and you're like, "Oh, that is problematic to bring that to the States."
Right.
And there's a lot of stuff like that, or like, then the same problems that perhaps like some early Tom and Jerry cartoons have and stuff like that, but taken way further than that, time wise. Like I said, like I still saw a few things here and there where you're like, oh, so that's still okay. I think this one's way worse. The natives are blackface pretty much.
Well, and they're
in Mothra, and I don't know, like of course it's of a time, but it's still really weird to watch now.
and if I may be kind because I also I feel that way. I go, this thing is of a time, and what that means is that it is reflective of not just racist attitudes, because that's definitely true, but a lot of times they're casually racist attitudes. In other words,
Sure.
the notion is people watching this movie are all going to be exactly the same. None of the people who are going to be offended by this movie are going to be in the theater watching it. So nobody cares. Basically is what was going on. So you had terrible presentations of black Americans in very old films in the United States, and nobody cared because there was an assumption that the black audience wouldn't even be watching. And then you actually had much more subtle films made particularly for black audiences, way back in the 30s and 40s, and so the moment you know that your audience is getting a little bit more diverse, you start to self-police a little bit. I think in this case, there's part of probably what is most problematic, if you want to be sensitive to indigenous peoples, is that the way indigenous peoples are presented in these movies, there is no attempt whatsoever to understand any actual indigenous peoples everywhere. You've just invented an entire culture. They've got feathers in their hair. They've got, they've got tiki gods like the Polynesians. They've got all kinds of stuff, and you've just sort of made something up. And and the funny thing is, it is offensive, and yet it's basically offensive as a bundle of offenses. They're so in. They don't actually give much to the story. I mean, in other words, they're really just there to like be caretaking King Kong until he leaves and goes to Tokyo, where the bulk of the story takes place. But I don't think there's any attempt whatsoever to do a realistic indigenous people. In fact, even trying to say the sentence out loud makes me laugh. So.
Well, I mean, like I said, they're similar in a lot of ways to what we see later in Mothra. But again, it is, you've got a bunch of Japanese actors and actresses. Well, what are you going to do to make them natives? Oh, well, makeup will be fine.
Yeah.
And there's no, I guess, malice to it. It's more of like this. Why wouldn't this be okay? Until you have
exactly.
to maybe it's really not okay.
Well, also remember that blackface has a very ugly tradition here in the United States, but God knows what its tradition is in other cultures. It's very possible that in countries where, it's ugly in our tradition because you had white actors dressing up as black actors when black actors couldn't get work, and meanwhile you've got these horrible laws going on, and and all that stuff. So there's this idea of like laughing and comedy against a backdrop of tragedy, but God knows what the Japanese thought about blackface.
Put it this way: read a lot of manga from the era, seen a lot of stuff. There's still enough where it's really not cool. And again, was hard for people to bring some of this over, translated. And they changed a lot of it. Cyborg 009, for example, the characters that are most problematic got revamps recently, and they should. You can't say it's of a time if you're not like going to be updating that to not be that way, right?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
And so it's gotten much better, but it's still one of those. Just if you don't understand why it's a problem, then you're not really gonna be reluctant to change it because why should we matter? Why should we care?
Yeah, if you don't understand why it's a problem, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that is what it is. But I mean, that's only part of this whole island thing because, looking back of it, you could do a whole cultural study on that. But that's not, I mean, it's still a really goofy movie that I think reading too much into it.
No, I don't
You
want
know,
I don't want to overdo it. That's for sure.
Yeah, but it's a thing for sure.
A million miles away from the gravity of this discussion, I want to say one other thing about the island that I comparing this to all the other King Kong movies that we've watched is, of course, like all Kong Islands, this movie has the wall that is presumably built to keep King Kong out.
Yeah.
It's the most useless wall because, of course, this King Kong is Godzilla-sized, and just the moment he gets an inkling, he just smashes right through it, which I loved.
Wow, the octopus is ripping it to shreds. Which I
Yeah.
guess it's weird that they never anticipated that. They're just like, oh no, and now an octopus. That's never happened. Somehow or another, this octopus has been biding its time. Just in time for the movie to happen. In fact,
he intimidates the octopus into going away. That was hilarious. When the octopus comes up, because the octopus wants the berry juice. This berry juice is some good stuff, and so the octopus comes up to get some of it, and we spend some time with this indigenous mom and kid who are trying to survive as the octopus is tearing a building apart, and then King Kong, they fight, but ultimately King Kong just scares the octopus away, which is really neat.
And then he gets loaded. He sits there and he drinks several barrels of this berry juice and basically just decides,
right.
Yeah, and then he gets drunk and takes a nap.
He just falls over like this 200-foot tall. I don't even know how to describe it. This 200-foot tall gorilla that just falls over like a statue.
Like your terrible uncle getting drunk at a family reunion. Oh, well,
I want
Kong
to give.
just wants to party, man.
Yeah.
That did make me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Joya said she wants a GIF of just King Kong falling over.
Yeah, just to have it as a meme on Facebook to be like, me when ... whatever it is, It's like,
I'm
cool.
sure we can make that happen.
Okay, so credit where it's due, though. Credit where it's due. Yeah, this is one of only 2 King Kong movies that actually bother with the idea of how the heck do you get King Kong back to civilization? Because most other like
I
Kong
love the raft.
76 deals with it. Yeah, I love it too. Because Kong 76 deals with it in a different way, and this movie deals with it in the way that they do. Most other King Kong movies just gloss over how problematic it would be getting King Kong back to civilization.
I mean, this one glosses over how problematic it is to get King Kong on the damn raft.
Yeah.
But somehow they managed to do that. But my favorite
I'm sure
thing
they
though
just
in the whole
drive the natives with more cigarettes to do it.
More radios.
My favorite thing in the whole film is actually even more than the fight is them rigging King Kong up to the balloons. It's so funny.
Save that because we will get to that. Yeah.
But I want to say the only thing about it is that those wires, for them to be strong enough to hold anybody, they should also be strong enough to cut them. And so both when the guy is demonstrating these super strong wires and when King Kong is getting lifted, and certainly when he's struggling against them, I was like, holy crap, he's probably getting cut up so much. So, but whatever, that's just a little thing.
You can assume that the natives built the raft the way, like, rolling logs worked at, like, building the pyramids and stuff. But I like that they also were like, hey, if King Kong escapes, we've got all these explosives. We're just going to blow him the hell up.
Yes.
Like,
that's
the whole raft with explosibles.
Yeah.
And comedy relief almost blows up Kong. Ha ha.
Oh my god.
Because they put the damn what do you call the thing that you push down
plunger.
on?
It's called a plunger.
The plunger deal, just like in the middle of the ship without any kind of like caution sign or anything.
But then it wouldn't
be as humorous.
It wouldn't be as humorous, Julie. Did you see the humor? He almost blew up Kong. But
Okay, speaking of the humor, I think we can answer your question about is the movie made for 8-year-olds. I think the answer is the movie is made for families in the same way that Disney was making quote unquote family movies back in the 60s. In other words, these were movies that had like storylines that would appeal to all generations, but the humor was kept at a level that pretty much any like that you needed to be no older than a middle schooler to understand the humor.
Well,
But yeah,
that character of the guy that owns the pharmaceutical company and the TV station, like this sort of corporate, first of all, he's the Carl Denham character of this movie.
yes,
So there's that.
yes,
But he is so broad, and like he basically looks like a Japanese Groucho Marx, and he's played like a cartoon character, and I was actually kind of wondering whether or not that character was going to grate on you, because the level of comedy here is so broad with that character.
It does. I mean, it would if he was on more, but he's not around very much. I mean, so you're totally right. You know my tastes pretty well by now, and I just can't stand really broad humor because it's just a waste of my time. But he's fine. I mean, he's here and gone, and I don't really give him another thought. So I was okay. But you're right. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. You couldn't like show this to your friends and without having to explain, look, I know that he's not funny. Just deal with it. He's only around for a couple scenes. Yeah, no, good point. And that's also what leads you to think this thing is supposed to be appealing both to kids and adults who are out
Absolutely.
with their kids, you know.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's so many things that we watch where you're going, what the hell's the point of that character? And if you watch it with a bunch of kids, they're like, the kids are cracking up at that, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, he also, these broad characters are also the ones who explain the plot in simpler terms. So that if the kids aren't quite sure what's going on, you have the comic relief Carl Denham character go, bring me a monster. It's like, okay, all right, whatever it is that's going on, they're trying to bring this guy a monster. Oh God. Anyway, by the way, Tony, like you said, they rig up the raft. It's pretty darn cool. I think you could get Kong onto the raft. If you could figure out a way to push him, then what you do is you would roll him over a bunch of posts until you got him in the water. And then once you got him in the water, then you might be able to get him onto the raft by pulling the raft down under him. Nevertheless, this is a lot of engineering for these people. They don't even seem to have that big a tribe. So, but whatever. Still, as Drew pointed out, they've thought about it more than most of the other movies have.
I like when
so
Kong
yeah.
wakes up though, and he's just like, "Wait, I'm just waiting out here, you guys." And causing trouble.
And then he just starts heading straight for Japan. We skipped something that I thought was very interesting, which is that the white folks in the UN newsroom say Godzilla is coming back, and King Kong is dangerous, and they say, well, King Kong should not be allowed in like a big city. And I'm like, wow, they seem to be in a different plot than the one of the company is bringing back King Kong. And then luckily the movie delivered the next step, which was Japan sends helicopters to the pharmaceutical company boat and says, please do not bring this giant ape to Japan. We think that would be unwise. And that's really literally.
Guys, look.
We've got enough monsters.
We got some cameras. Like, have you seen our turtles and our moths and our three-headed golden winged creatures? We've got like a Rodan or two. Please, oh God, we don't need an ape as well. As much as you want to bring back an ape to show us, we know there's giant monsters, guys. We've got a giant lizard.
Yeah, God bless. Yeah, you're right. It's not even going to be as useful because people won't be as impressed by the existence of a giant monster because they're Japanese and they have them all the time. All that plot will change.
It cracks me up that they're like, hey, I know, let's put these guys together, and then maybe they'll wipe each other out. And then King Kong's like, hell no.
Yes.
He like put them together, and Kong's like, yeah, I'm so out of here. That dude is like breathing fire.
Yes.
I want nothing to do with this. So he like runs away. But then they take him with the balloons and the wires and drop him right in front of Godzilla, and he's like, fuck no, and he runs away again.
Also, there's no Soma.
That's the part that just made me laugh so hard.
There's no Soma on, in Japan. So Kong, I mean, he's basically like goes to Dry County.
Yes.
How would I even be here? There's a dangerous lizard that shoots fire at me and nothing to drink.
Right.
You guys are terrible. Why should
Well,
I?
they do later on, and I want to talk about Godzilla first before we get to the big fight. And I think that'll be our last topic is the big fight. But they do wind up bringing some of the drug and like shooting a bunch of it under his nose so that he gets a, kind of a hit, and then he's able to.
Well, that, and also they give him electricity, which in this film, which is different from any of the other Kong films we've seen, he's actually fueled by electricity, which is something that needed to happen because otherwise he didn't stand a chance against Godzilla. There's no way. But because he had this electricity, booster shot or whatever, then either with the storm or when he just is able to bite into to electrical wires, then he's able to kind of shock Godzilla and gets extra strength so he can throw him a little bit. But so that was good because that's another kind of high that he gets.
Well, that whole thing with the electricity, there's a lot of, I don't know if this is true or not. There's a lot of people who think that is left over from when this was going to have, when it was King Kong versus Frankenstein. But of course, the problem with that, which is why I don't quite believe it. The problem with that is, we have Godzilla subbing for Frankenstein, not the other way around. So why would King Kong get electricity powers? But I just think that they wanted to give King Kong superpowers because that's what they did. Most Japanese monsters, aside from being big, have some kind of extra added power.
So, that's where I was getting at, Drew. I was wondering what your take on. I kind of see where it could be kind of sublimated into a thing where Kong becomes the Frankenstein. I'm not sure. I'm thinking about it. I'm surprised that there wasn't in the exposition part, like where they said something akin to Soma. Of course, not as good as Ovaltine or Tang, and just get all your everything, all your advertisement out there, because those are things in America at the time.
What's interesting is that a lot of.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No. What I was going to say, what's interesting about that is that Godzilla. A lot of Godzilla movies are called Frankenstein movies in Germany.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I guess they thought Frankenstein was a known thing and Godzilla wasn't so much at that point in time. So when they would when they would promote Godzilla movies in Germany, they would put Frankenstein in the title.
This is just their word for monster. Then it just, in other words, it just became another word for monster. That's interesting. Let's talk about Godzilla as he appears here, because it's really interesting to me that Godzilla he looks different than he looked in the 1954 film. So this is just 9 years or less after that original movie. Godzilla is not nearly as floppy as he was in the 54 movie, but it looks bigger around the shoulders and the chest. But I don't know. He's already starting, though, to me, to look cuter. To look a little more sort of. Even though I would suggest that Godzilla is the bad guy of this movie. I think without a doubt. If they're, he's more the force of nature that needs to be fought off. But he's cuter. He's on his way to looking like the puppy dog Godzilla that we'll finally get. At the end of this cycle with
well, he's actually to me he's a lot more reptilian looking than the Godzilla in the 50s movies. Like his face is narrower and looks more like a crocodile, whereas to me the 50s Godzilla had little ears on it, and he almost had like a almost had like a canine type look to his face, where this looks way more dinosaurian to me.
Tony, what are your thoughts about the development of Godzilla's look? Isn't it the case that Godzilla just changes basically every movie?
Okay, yeah. I mean, even if there's a few kind of it evolves. I think my favorite's still 85. I like that look. I think it's a good mix. But yeah, everyone has their favorite Godzilla and every suit's slightly different and there's an evolution. This one, there's some scenes where it's a lot more rubbery in the neck.
Yeah.
It doesn't really kind of look as good. But I agree. I think that this one's not as good. But it's like sometimes he looks more cat-like. Sometimes he also has more like almost a gorilla aspect to him.
Yeah.
But I think if you ask a bunch of different Godzilla fans, everybody kind of has their favorite. There's a bunch of really cool. If you Google it, there's a bunch of really cool comparisons.
One thing I noticed
in a book called Godzilla, We Love You Every Time. My favorite names for a book ever, and also it's true. I do love you every time, Godzilla. With the exception of Revenge of Godzilla, which I really have a hard time liking. And that one, Godzilla's son, Mini Godzilla, Minila, teaches a kid to stand up to bullies.
I remember that movie very well. That's mostly what that movie's about. Is
Godzilla stock footage.
Yeah. But
other than that,
one of the
Godzilla, I do love you every time.
One thing they'll do in these movies as they go along and they keep renovating the suit, he'll get floppier. By the time he's like up against the smog monster, he has giant eyes and he looks super cute, like a puppet. But eventually they'll come up with this innovation where, to avoid the floppiness of the neck, they'll make the neck more and more of this like skeletal armature, so that his whole sort of shoulder neck part is this like way armored pointy bit with his head up at the top. Now I get that that's where the guy wearing the suit, I get that's where his head goes, but that's not the point. That was always the case. They get rid of the floppiness, and it also gives him more of a kind of an elongated look that'll happen.
So looking it up, and I'd
like this is 62.
By the way,
what's that?
What Drew was saying. Sometimes Godzilla is actually referred to as Frankenstein's monster. So Frankenstein's monster fights Ghidorah, and Frankenstein's monster chases Godzilla's son, or Ghidorah, the smog monster. Frankenstein versus the devil.
That is nuts.
Nothing about either Godzilla or, and they said sometimes there'll be a throwaway line of this was created by Frankenstein, because Frankenstein just makes monsters. So sometimes
love it.
I guess.
Well, I mean that's exactly like how in foreign films. Well, a lot of times when they'll take an English movie or Italian movie and they're selling it in Germany or France or whatever, cheap films, if it has blood of any kind, they would put Dracula in the title. And even if it's a serial killer, even if it's a Jack the Ripper movie, if they're like, people aren't knowing Jack the Ripper very well right now, so let's just call it Dracula with a knife or something. They just would use that name. So yeah, that's like one of my favorite things about life, is just the way that people retitle movies. Perfect. Okay, so yes, this Godzilla comes around. The Japanese know Godzilla. They know enough to get the hell out of town. They regard him as something like weather, honestly. And and it's just a matter of trying to figure out how bad is it, what kind of weaponry do we need to use. But they know that Godzilla exists. And where this film finally goes to, and let's get to this, the film finally decides that the people in it are like, we don't want to use a nuclear weapon because for sure that'll blow up Tokyo. We don't want to blow up Tokyo with a nuclear weapon. So luckily there's a giant ape not far away. Maybe we can lure him to fight Godzilla. And as Julia pointed out, the first time King Kong shows up near Godzilla like breathes fire, and Kong is like, nah, and he just and he wanders away.
That guy has fire. I don't have fire. Perhaps
he literally shakes his head. The guy in the gorilla suit just goes.
No, it's so cute. I just adore it. It's like the funniest thing ever. Well, and especially like I say, when he gets dropped off with the balloon, and he's like they roll down the hill, and then he just walks up the hill like, holy crap. Like what just happened? Oh my god, it's so funny. But then, yeah, it's only when he gets his lightning powers that he starts to get his confidence. Otherwise, it's like, oh.
Well, they also make a big noise about pointing out that Kong is smarter than Godzilla. Like that.
Yeah, but he doesn't use that. When did he ever use that?
I would say the fact that he keeps his distance at first is fine.
Well, that's true.
Rudimentary intelligence.
I mean, that's
whether or not
bugs.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly make him seem brave, but whatever.
No, I think it would have been good actually if he would have outsmarted Godzilla somehow.
Well, maybe
Kong.
Maybe when we get around to the revised, the new version of this that they're going to do, maybe we'll finally see some of that, because there's certainly, as much as I like this movie, there's certainly you can milk this concept for more than they actually do with this movie.
Yeah, but I mean, they also a lot of people forget that. When Jason said this is kind of slow, this is pretty much on par for most Godzilla movies.
True.
Lots of build up and a few fight scenes. Well, people remember the fight scenes because this one's especially enjoyable, even though it does have some really crappy sped up footage. The monster wrestling parts are really fun and ridiculous and great.
Well, the fun is that, again,
monster wrestling should be. But there's a lot of not as good fighting compared to other Godzilla movies that have cool stuff, better things in the fights.
Again, though, the funny thing is about this is it's not actually that much of a Godzilla movie if you think about it. Like, the bulk of the screen time really does seem like it's King Kong. I mean, they try to get as much King Kong stuff into this movie that they even go so far as to have him climb a building with a girl in his hand.
Oh, that's
awesome. They really wanted to get all that King Kong stuff that they could milk from this.
Yeah. He shakes a train apart and gets a girl and climbs up a building.
I liked that stuff. I really enjoyed the goofiness of them going, you know what? It's important to have Kong pick up a girl and carry her around. We find out that's basically why we've been following these characters. Two of them are going to be on the boat that goes to get King Kong, and one will be the girl that gets picked up by King Kong. That's why this stuff is here. Oh. And the only reason she gets away is because they hit Kong with a big dose of Soma, which knocks him out and then brings him back ready for action. And then he's able to take on...
Which, in my opinion, should have knocked out that girl more than it did. Like, it kind of... She was a little bit unconscious, but then she comes back pretty quick. And I'm like, shouldn't that stuff also knock her out if it knocks her out?
She was shielded. Yeah.
And then we can get in, like a giant woman.
Well, shouldn't have.
Yeah, totally. The 50-foot woman, whatever she's called.
If it knocks him out, I would argue that would probably kill her.
Kill her, exactly.
I think that she was shielded by his fingers. That his fingers acted as a filter, and most of the Soma did not get to her.
The good enough filter is if he's asphyxiating her.
Yeah,
I think that the fur on his fingers acted as a filter and let some oxygen through, whereas some of it was Soma. This is my best Marvel No Prize explanation.
So really, though, I mean, if he was, who are we to judge what Kong's into? Really? I mean, we saw some of it in 76 Kong, but...
I love when he goes after Godzilla and he picks up Godzilla. They basically hurl things at one another, but Godzilla picks up King Kong picks up a tree and just goes and shoves it in Godzilla's mouth.
No, all the wrestling parts are great. The sped up footage parts are really dumb and look even.
I love that they're tripping one another with rocks and trees and Godzilla's tail and all of that.
All of that stuff.
And then when they get on either side of that building on Mount Fuji, which I apologize, I don't know what it is, historical building, they get on either side of it and just start whomping one another and destroying the building between them. It is this funny, it's so silly that you would have these two giants and going, well, I guess there's this historic building, it's the only thing on the in the countryside, let's stand on either side of it and destroy it. And then as soon as that happens, that's the end of the movie. That's the amazing thing. As soon as they destroy that building, they beat one another up and they fall over, and then Godzilla disappears, and that's the end. So, basically, yeah.
We should address at that point that for years there was a myth that in Japan Godzilla won,
Yeah.
and in America King Kong won, when actually it's a draw the whole time.
Yeah. Did you hear that? And by the way, it's a Tommy Castle. I apologize. Anyway, did you hear that myth when you were growing up? Because I
Oh,
certainly
sure.
did.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
that was what I always heard was the case, that in Japan people saw an ending where King Kong won, and in America people saw an ending where I'm sorry, Japan saw Godzilla win, America King Kong won, and I believed that. I believed that probably till I was in college, and then read enough data that just said
Well, it was
that's
even
not
a
true.
Trivial Pursuit question.
Yeah.
Like this was
Was it really?
widely believed, yeah. And I mean,
Wow.
I believed it as well for most of my life. I never thought to question it because it sounds like the exact sort of B movie
Yeah.
pageantry that went on during this time period. It's
Yeah.
so I had no hard time believing that at all. But I was always disappointed with the fact that they go under the water and we never really see what's going on in the fight underwater. That was always what always would disappoint me about this movie in the end. I felt like that I wanted to see what the fight was like under the water.
There are a couple things. The dialogue, of course, we get Mr. Exposition, and then we
Yes.
see on the view screen Kong like going off, swimming, and the people talk about, oh, he disappears without a trace. So that we added that. They
He
evidently
says something like, "Strangely enough, we wish him luck on his long, long journey home." Like, why are you saying "strangely enough" about yourself? Like, that's the weirdest
By the way, you
piece of
had zero
dialogue I've
stakes
ever.
in this. He wasn't in Japan. You were in the UN office. You got to watch from safety. Zero stakes for you, Mr. UN. Like,
Anyway, continue your thought. Yeah,
so there is
I'm
a
sorry.
thing where the Kong and Godzilla fighting, there's an earthquake, and in the American one they use stock footage. Also, and I'd forgotten about this because it's been, like I said, a long time since I've seen the Japanese one, and it was probably on like bootleg VHS as far as I remember. In the end of the Japanese one, you get a Godzilla roar when it says the end,
Really?
which is what happens usually. And
Are you serious?
in the American version, you get a Kong roar.
Oh,
Mixed in the soundtrack. So that's probably added to the
wow.
myth, but
Yeah.
there's not
Well, I
really
think
real.
that is the source of the myth. I think that's it, Tony. I think that's people just remembered Godzilla roars at the end of the Japanese one. That means he won. I think that's where that idea went. That's how that sort of yeah. I think you nailed it. I think that's where it came from. It's really interesting. Go ahead.
Anyway, Drew, you were also talking.
Well, I was just thinking about the recent American Godzilla movie and the logic of that, how you get to the final fight in that is, you have two giant monsters, or in that case three, and we don't want to use atomic weapons on them, the same thing being said in both movies. So we come around to let them fight. And I was just thinking, like, the justification for having giant monsters fight each other has not changed at all since the 60s. And I'm kind of okay with that. It's just like, just let them fight.
Let them fight. You're right. They do it with a lot more like somber dialogue and kind of carefully crafted bullshit in the new one, but it still does come down to two big monsters, let them fight, because of course, why else are we here? Yeah. And it's funny how the new movies are much less willing to embrace just nonsense the way that the old movies are. But maybe you could argue that, because as I think about that, actually, if you assume that the whole thing is nonsense and they're just putting it into nice dialogue, then I guess they're doing okay.
So,
Yeah.
really on the side, I don't know why I've never been here, but as I was looking to check some things, I went to the Godzilla King of the Monsters Reddit area, and I have to say this is some of the coolest. The cursor is a Godzilla. When you mouse over Godzilla King of the Monsters, it changes to Gojira, and then there's the little Reddit guy who's also Godzilla and breathes fire when you mouse over him. So everyone should go to the Godzilla Reddit page, which I don't know why I've never been here. I feel like an idiot. This is a trifecta of amazing things going on, and I want this Godzilla cursor to be on my all of my computers now.
That sounds perfect. All right, let's get our final thoughts about King Kong versus Godzilla, and then do our endorsements. So Tony, I wrap it up for us. What are your final thoughts? What have we missed? What can people look for if they run out tomorrow and go watch it?
Well, hey, I'm still gonna say it's a travesty that we don't have a disc with both versions of the film, but we have the opposite problem with Godzilla '85. We only have the '84 one, which I'm fine with because I like the Japanese one. But it'd be nice to have the one that I saw in theaters. That would be great. I think there's a lot of awesome stuff. I think it's paced. People may still say it's slow. It's paced almost exactly like almost any Godzilla movie you watch. So it has more fighting, in fact, than some of the older ones. So all the Godzilla versus King Kong stuff is great. Like I said, there's a lot of nostalgia, but there's also, these are as far as giant monsters go, these are the top. These are the ones people remember. Gamera right below that. But as far as it all goes, Godzilla versus King Kong is, you name Frankenstein versus, Dracula versus the werewolf, Frankenstein versus werewolf, Mummy, any combo you can think of. This is the giant monster equivalent of that. And I think it's a blast. I was super excited about the disc, and the disc is super cheap. It's like $10 or something for Blu-ray for this much enjoyment. Yeah, that's awesome. Like not too much more than Starbucks. Starbucks for $2 will get you monster battling action. That's pretty awesome.
Awesome. Okay, Julia, how would you sum up King Kong versus Godzilla?
Yeah, I think I said last time that it wouldn't be fair. It's not fair to compare when we compare films that are made on a shoestring budget to films that are made with Hollywood big budget or whatever. So, I think my initial thing of, the costumes are stupid or whatever, it's not really fair for me to hold it to the standard of, super awesome CG that we've been seeing. So I have to say, give that, credit where credit's due, that they're doing what they can with what they have. And so that said, I think it's a lot of fun. Certainly there's a lot of things that I wish they would have done differently, but given our conversation about how it's meant to appeal to kids as well as adults, I guess that's why some of those choices were made. And also just because, like you said, the time and whatever. But gosh, I think it definitely earns whatever props it gets during the comic scenes with the monsters, and like I said, the balloons just lifting up King Kong, his little weird wire swing just made my day. I really, that's another image that I would just like to have like a poster of or something.
It would
sorry?
Like just the captions like "Dream It" or "Believe,"
exactly.
like rainbow,
No, Tony, we should make a series of memes or posters or whatever of just different inspirational messages that star Godzilla and King Kong. Because that's brilliant. I love that. Believe.
It's just
that's fantastic.
Or I'm out.
Drew, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think, again, I like this movie a lot. I'm not going to lie and say that there's no nostalgia goggles involved with that, but, sometimes that's just how it is. I would advise people to look into the history of this movie, because I'm sorry we didn't discuss that more, and I think that's a really interesting topic. You can actually find production sketches for King Kong versus Frankenstein or King Kong versus Prometheus on the internet if you look hard enough. It's this movie has a fascinating history, and it's also, because it was successful, it is also arguably why we have an entire Godzilla series, and I think that that's also important. So I think, my final thought is only, you should read up on the history of this movie, because like King Kong 76, this has a lot of interesting stuff that went into it. And, I guess my only other thought is that it's also a really colorful movie. And I think, and the way movies from the 60s, particularly the early 60s are, I enjoy all the colors in this movie. So that's all I got now.
Fantastic. I would add nothing to that. I think we've talked about all the things that make this film cool, and And you also have led us in the direction of finding out more about the history, particularly your reference to the silent King Kong, Japanese King Kong films of the 1930s, which I want to know more about. So cool stuff. And in fact, we'll be back next week with the very next Toho King Kong, which I believe is a better designed outfit. But we'll see. We will see. Or in fact, two, but one of them is even more unusual. So, okay. I want to find out about your endorsements, what you've been watching, what you've been listening to, or anything else that you want us to know about. So let's come back around to Tony. Tony, what do you have to recommend for us?
Let's see. Oh, I'm trying to think of everything I have been watching. Picked up a little bit on the new MST3K, which I have mixed feelings about. But I think episode 3 has some really great stuff. On the
Okay, mine is also MST3K, so I want to discuss it. We can discuss it
Um,
now, or we can discuss it when I do mine.
Okay.
All right, because Julia, I know that you've been watching it too. Harry Knowles, who I think is wonderful, posted on his Facebook. He's like, "I'm glad MST3K is back, but I feel problematic about it because they're taking on some movies that I have respect for, and I don't know how to feel about that, and I don't either. So I mean, I know my personal opinion, Jason's opinion about it, but I find a lot of people feel the same thing, and you feel something similar, don't you?
Yeah, they did some like I actually like Star Crash.
Right.
And I actually like Land Beyond Time? Land Before Time?
Well, I
Yeah.
noticed they had Land That Time Forgot. I
That's
haven't
what I
watched
meant.
any of this
Oh,
They
yet.
have
man.
both
But
of the Doug McClure, the Doug McClure, Jules Verne movies. Yes.
I like that
Basically.
movie, and
Sure.
but I will say that Time Travelers had some great bits. And I like the new I like the new version. I do think that it plays a little bit to the hey, remember this? I don't know. There's a certain freewheelingness to the originals.
Yes.
That hey, we're just trying to see what sticks, and I
Yeah.
think this one is much more calculated
Hmm.
what they're presenting to you and how they present it, and I'm kind of mixed on that, but I think there's some great bits. I've also been watching season 2 of The Get Down, which I like a lot, even though I find a couple of the characters really annoying, and the new Archer, which I'm always down for. So also always
Awesome.
good, and I wish I had the channel. I wish I had AMC. Better Call Saul is always great. I didn't think originally. I was like, how's this gonna hold up? But I really like that show. And again, I'm gonna chill for the band Duel, who Jeff Henson, who's a guitarist in Duel. They're about to release their new album, and they're about to go on tour in Europe. So if we do have any fans in Europe, you should catch Duel. They're really great. Jeff's a great guy. He's making our Rise from Fire album, and they make great, awesome music. So you should also check out Duel because they make some pretty awesome rock.
Outstanding. Julia, do you have anything to endorse for us?
Well, yeah, I mean, MST definitely is fun. I think I like that they, even though they probably have a lot more money now, they're still using a lot of the silly original effects and just kind of dressed them up a little. But what I was going to endorse actually is the new season of Doctor Who, and then the spin-off called Class. I saw the first episode. I think I'm going to give it a tepid endorsement. I'm not 100% sold on it yet because it's just the first episode, and it was pretty good. I want to see how it ends up gelling, or if it does. But but I mean, I love Doctor Who, so for me, I'm excited just to have more in that universe. So we'll see how it goes. And I like the new companion a lot. Her name is Bill.
Yeah, absolutely. Drew, what do you got going on?
Well, I'm still enjoying exploring my new Hulu subscription, and
Uh-huh.
they have a lot of original programming that I have been checking out. The thing that I am the furthest into is actually something I literally heard nothing about until I got Hulu, which is an animated show called The Awesomes, and it's a superhero comedy thing. It's created by Seth Meyers from Saturday Night Live, and actually it's mostly voiced by people from Saturday Night Live. The character designs are really fun. They have kind of like a Silver Age look to it, and one of the things I always particularly like about comedic takes on superheroes is that they're not quite as self-conscious about exploring the whimsical side of superhero comics, which a lot of more serious modern adaptations kind of stay away from. It's got some legitimate comic book street cred because they have Judd Winnick writing a lot of the episodes, and he's one of the producers. It's got perhaps a little too much product placement in the first season, and the first season is definitely it's hit or miss with the episodes. But by the time I got into the second season, it's not quite maybe in Venture Brothers level weight class, but it's with at least punching reach of Archer in terms of being kind of a genre parody that's animated. Like I just finished the second season. I'm gonna get into the third one when I get a chance. I have to finish Hellsing Ultimate first, but. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a fun show, and I hope more people check it out because, like I said, I had literally not heard a single thing about it, and it was just recommended to me by Hulu based on some of the other stuff that I had watched. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll watch this, and I ended up really, really liking it. And of course, I do have a certain fetish for oddball loser superheroes, so this definitely plays into that. But I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast would probably find stuff to enjoy about it.
What's the There's something similar to that I've seen on I can't remember if it was on Hulu or Crackle or where, but it was a similar thing. It was a super team, but this one was done stop motion, so that it looked a lot like like a short for SNL or something like that. And and they were claymated, and it was this similar thing. It was a lot of like satire on superheroes. Does anybody remember what I'm talking about?
I don't know about that either, but that sounds great.
No, it was great. And Bryan Cranston was in it. Here it is. Titanium Rex is by and the heroes are called the Super Mansion. Oh yeah, okay, Super Mansion. Well, there we go. Okay, so that's one of my endorsements. Bryan Cranston and Super Mansion, and yours is the Awesomes, and it sounds like pretty much they're very, very similar stuff. And certainly Super Mansion gave me a Venture Brothers vibe as well.
Well,
To get back
Venture
to
Brothers,
this,
as far as this kind of stuff goes, Venture Brothers is kind of my measuring stick by
For
with
sure.
all animated action parodies are kind of, because the Venture Brothers is just kind of next level good, and then like I think below that you have Archer, and then below that you have everything else.
yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, Venture Brothers is just so brilliant. Okay, to get back to the MST3K question for a second, I I do think this new one is more consistently funny than the original. This is a deeply sacrilegious thing to say, but if you go back and watch a lot of the old MST3K from the 90s, a lot of the mad sequences are long on minutes and short on laughs. And I think the guys who were making them would say that as well, because they were often writing those things at the last minute. Sometimes they hit, sometimes they didn't. I've watched the first couple episodes of the new show, and I think it is more consistently funny. I think the jokes hit better. But getting back to the question of, is it okay for MST3K to make fun of movies that we like? I have always come down on the side of yes, personally, just because what Harry said was it makes you unable to ever watch the movie seriously again. I would never question the wisdom of Harry Knowles, but on the other hand, I don't think that per se is true for me. It in many cases it just increases my enjoyment of a movie if the movie is a lot of fun, but then I see, MST3K does it and they come up with jokes around it. They're two different experiences, and it doesn't bother me at all.
Well,
I think
I'm totally in the middle
yeah.
on that actually myself. Like I totally see where he's coming, and I have had it where it kind of comes back. This Island Earth, for example, which is the movie. I mean, I legitimately like This Island Earth.
I love This Island Earth. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I do see, like, you go back and watch something, it's harder to watch it without it. There's a few, like Santa Claus, a couple of Santa Claus movies. Man, I don't know if I can watch Santa Claus versus the Martians without Mystery Science Theater.
No,
Um,
no, nor yeah, and it would be absurd to treat Santa Claus versus the Martians with any kind of gravity, and you could watch it without commentary just because you were going to study it and maybe write something about it and whatever. But I don't think you're disrespecting it by watching it with the comedy as well.
but
I
I
mean,
understand where people. I mean, I get why people think it's a bad thing. It did embolden a lot of people to think that that's the cool thing and that they're awesome comedians and haha, I should talk during this movie because I saw it.
yeah,
I've seen that happen before, especially from brutally unfunny people,
yeah,
and that kind of sucks. But
it
so
does. Yeah,
I get why people dislike Mystery Science Theater. Or it's okay if you just don't think it's funny. Like that's fine too. In this one, I think so far the highlight has been Time Travelers, which is the third episode, I believe.
I've only seen the first two so
Well,
far.
when you get to the third one, Jason, I thought of you the most because I think there's a bunch of stuff in there that's actually really good. Like there's
Okay,
some really good riffs. So there you go.
all right. I can't wait. And anyway, I thought that was a really interesting conversation going on. And in fact, I think if people want to weigh in on something on our page, I'm dying to hear what you think about this question of can you take a movie that is beloved, like At Earth's Core, or I don't know. Let's say you pick something like Them, or even something really beloved like Phantasm. Is it fair to have a version of it with jokes? Does that harm it in any way? And Harry says definitely it harms it, shouldn't be done. I come down on the side of the more the merrier. But and Tony's saying, but what about the culture? And I think that's a good point. It is we've let the joke making genie out of the bottle, and it has affected uh, movie watching culture to some extent. I mean, you and I, Tony, we talk about movies if we're sitting on the couch watching a movie, right? We're watching a movie and we go, wow, look at the size of that ship. That's really amazing. Not even necessarily jokes, but like, oh, isn't that thing that we saw in this other movie, blah, blah, blah.
Which
But
is
we wouldn't do that if we were in the theater.
Yeah.
If we were in a movie theater, we wouldn't do that.
Right. Perfectly acceptable if you're on your couch and it's friends
Yeah.
and
You'll
that's
note
what
that
it
he
is.
says this. He says this to you, Tony, but not to me because he knows that I'll totally talk in the theater.
No, you don't.
Oh,
No, I
You
so
don't
whisper.
talk in.
I want to remember you as a friend.
Okay. There are two, like I remember going to see Rear Window one in Dallas and
Yeah.
having to put up with people trying to do MST3K to Hitchcock and
Oh,
having
fuck
to
those people.
yell at
Yeah.
yell at those people because that was annoying. And
Yeah.
at the same time, like you want to talk about like certain movies, it's appropriate. Like when I saw Freddy versus Jason, people were hooting and hollering like it was a wrestling match, but that's completely
Right.
appropriate. It's that kind of like the movie we did. If you're watching King Kong versus Godzilla and you want to act like a goofball while that's on, that's fine. I think people just need to gauge themselves,
That's
but
probably true.
you were talking about like movies that are beloved. I mean, didn't Riff Tracks do Night of the Living Dead?
Yeah,
Oh
no,
yeah,
I've
and it's
not-
funny.
Jason's watched
It
it.
is. It is.
I have not watched it just because that's one of those where I don't know, man. I just
Uh-huh.
it didn't appeal to me.
No, I'm with you. I
Master
understand.
Pancake, Owen and John and all of those guys who do Master Pancake here in town, they are fantastic comedians. Great timing. They are awesome. They every once in a while they'll do a Master Pancake on a movie, and I look at it. Well, I think it's cool if everybody wants to go see that, but that is not. I don't want to see the jokey version of that movie,
Yeah.
and it's awesome because they're gonna do an awesome job. Don't get me wrong; like, no way am I disparaging what they do, but for me, there's a few movies that they do that I am not going to go see them. They're usually they're not
I
movies
understand
in particular
completely.
that are sacrosanct to me, but they're good enough that not why I watched that movie.
It would give you the wrong feeling. I understand completely.
And I know they're going to do an
I
awesome
remember-
job. Like, I bet it's actually probably really funny. But that's on me, you know.
There was this argument a few years ago with a show that was on USA, and I'm trying to remember. Sandra Bernhardt had this show a few years, 20 years ago, where it was made up mainly of just clips, of goofy clips from crazy movies. You know, like movies like The Incredibly Strange Creature or Circus Magic or whatever. And I remember saying to somebody else, this is a pretty good show. Some of the jokes are good. I said, but if you're a purist and you feel like you need to watch the entire movie and that it's not fair to be taking clips out, then you won't enjoy it. And he was like, no, I'm not that person. But there are those people. I mean, that was one of the things that people hated about It Came from Hollywood, was that It Came from Hollywood was essentially a clip show about bad movies. And some of the movies were pretty good in there. Sometimes I think we feel that way because we kind of feel protective of older movies not a lot of people have heard from, and we don't want other people's only exposure to a movie to be like 3 minutes that John Candy is doing goofy voices about, you know, in It Came from Hollywood. I don't know. I mean, it's lonely to be a
I
nerd. Is all I
legitimately
can say.
like The Land That Time Forgot. Like, I like that movie. Like, that's a movie I
Sure.
revisit every few years on my own. And
But you could
So
still
I
make
don't-
jokes, or can you not make jokes? Actually, I'll let you continue. Your thought. Go ahead.
I don't know that I'm kind of with Tony. I don't know if I want to see, I acknowledge that there's stuff about the movie that's cheesy, but, I don't know if
Yeah.
I want to watch a version of it with jokes.
Okay, I can totally dig that. So this is a really great conversation. I kind of feel like this needs its own panel at a Comic-Con, honestly, because that does not bother me at all. But I am not at all dissing the idea that it would just make your skin crawl and make you angry to watch. I get it. I totally get it. So this one needs a longer discussion. All right. And in fact, we can start that discussion on the Facebook page. If you are a listener, you should come to the Facebook page, leave comments, and we will totally engage with you. It would be really great if you would leave us reviews on iTunes, because the iTunes reviews go out to all the other podcast players, and so people will be able to read those, and it means a lot to us. And we read the reviews and pass them around and shake our fists at the sky if we feel sad about them. So here's your chance to buck us up. And we'll be back next week with one more King Kong in our King Kong retrospective. And boy, is it a doozy, because it has a giant robot Kong. I cannot wait to see the giant robot Kong. All right, guys, have a fantastic week. I really appreciate that you were on with me to discuss this wonderful and wonderfully strange movie, King Kong versus Godzilla. Goodbye.
All right.